that marijuana is so much less dangerous than alcohol. Why should marijuana remain illegal in the state of Maryland?
Let me explain my position broadly regarding marijuana laws. There are three things to sort of consider that we've been taking up in and out. One is medical marijuana, and that's where we're giving authorization to physicians and other healthcare providers to be able to prescribe marijuana for medicinal purposes. You go to some countries like Israel, they already have something like 60 different forms of cannabis. Much like in this country, we have different types of hypertension medicine, and you got to try this one, that doesn't work, so you try this one, and eventually you get the right one. Because there's so many benefits from a medical standpoint to marijuana, some states are light years ahead, some nations are light years ahead of this country. Maryland is finally on board. I supported legislation that not only authorized it, but this year made it a little bit easier to set it up where doctors can prescribe prescription marijuana for medicinal purposes. On the other side, and I mentioned there are three pieces that we look at, is the legalization of marijuana that some are calling for, where we would regulate it and we would tax it, much like we do alcohol, where we don't let underage people consume it, you can't consume it and drive, and the other sort of regulations, and then we tax it. There are two states in this nation that are already moving forward with that, Colorado and Washington. I think we ought to look closely at the experience in Colorado and Washington. One of the beauties of this country, this federalism that we live in, this democracy, it's a laboratory where states can try things, what works and what doesn't work. So let's look at what happens in Washington and Colorado and look at not just the financial benefit to the state, because they're already demonstrating that through taxation they're collecting a lot of money. Well, let's look at the full range of socioeconomic impacts before we make a decision whether to legalize marijuana. And then there's that third piece, sort of the in-between piece, if you will. And that's the decriminalization of marijuana. And this year, I co-authored with Joe Johns, many of you may know him, the executive director of the Center for Urban Families. We co-authored an op-ed to the Baltimore Sun where we forcefully said we need to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. Why? A number of reasons. One study shows that it's $100 million a year just to prosecute those cases. We could take that and invest in investigations and law enforcement strategies against more violent conduct. We could take that and we could invest in substance abuse treatment and counseling. But there's a second reason why I support the decriminalization of marijuana. In this country, we've got the best criminal justice system in the world, but it's not perfect. And in this country, African Americans in the white community consume marijuana at about the same rates. But young African American men are arrested at a significantly higher rate. There's a racial bias in the system. And what happens when they're arrested? They've got a record. And what happens when you have a record?
Done.
Hard to get a job, hard to get college, hard to get affordable housing. And that's why not only did I support the decriminalization of marijuana, but I rolled out a proposal to reduce violence in our community and reduce recidivism. And in that proposal, I called for banning the box, which we've done in state government. Let's do it in county government. And the seal ball, to let corporations ban the box. And I'm going to end on this note. Because this is a very important note. We've got the best criminal justice system in the world, but it's not perfect. I stood with the NAACP and Ben Jealous when we repealed the death penalty in Maryland. I differ from some candidates on this campaign trail. The Attorney General supports the death penalty. And when I was asked before that legislative committee, why do you support repeal the death penalty? I said it comes down to numbers. Here's the number. Follow me. Here's the number. Not only is a majority of death row inmates in Maryland African American, yet we are still a minority. But follow this number. 26% of the cases in this country that would be considered a capital case or a death penalty case, 26%. Delegate Sandy Rosenberg, he was the chief sponsor for this bill. 26% of those cases, there's an African-American male defendant and a white victim. If you look at death row around this country, 70% of death row inmates are black men with white victims. There is racial bias in the system. We had to repeal the death penalty, and that's what we did last year. The Attorney General says it's a wonderful tool. I say ask Anthony Gray. In the 1980s, Anthony Gray, a black man in Calvert County, the prosecutor went to him and threatened the death penalty. He admitted to the crime. He spent 5 years in jail to avoid the death penalty, and then he was released. Not because he had a faulty trial, but because they found the real killer. The death penalty is an irrevocable punishment. You put people to death wrongly, it's not reliable, and you get bad results. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.